Welcome to Seed to Exit, the podcast where we uncover the stories, strategies, and insights that power the startup ecosystem. I'm your host, Reese Keck, founder of MindHire, a talent acquisition firm specializing in helping startups build exceptional teams. Each week, I sit down with founders, investors, and industry leaders to explore the journeys behind iconic companies and game-changing ideas. Whether you're building, investing, or just curious about what it takes to succeed in the startup world, I want this podcast to be your go-to resource for actionable insights and inspiring conversations. Now, if you enjoy the show, please don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, or share it with your network. Your support means the world and really helps bring more incredible conversations to life. Patrick, thanks for coming on.
Very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I'm excited to talk to you. I know we've been connected on LinkedIn for a while. I've seen a lot of your posts jamming out just around different aspects of sales, go-to-market, product. So really excited to dive into some more of your knowledge with you today. So before we get into things, tell me a little bit more about Pod, your inspiration for starting the company, and some of the traction you've gotten so far.
Yeah, so at Pod, we're a pipeline coaching tool for B2B sales team. So pretty much my whole career, I've been at the intersection of product and go-to-market, working directly with account executives in my last gig. So doing the cold calls, the demo calls, the qualification calls. I got a chance to work hand in hand with AEs and understand a bit of their pain points. And ultimately what I saw as being one of the biggest thing I saw at the end of the day is a lot of account executives make mistakes managing their pipeline and lose deals because they lack the know-how and the guidance to know how to push deals forward, right? They basically have, a lot of information scattered all over the place and very limited guidance. They're lucky if they get 30 minutes a week with their manager. So what we're doing at Pod is pretty simple. We're trying to help them to manage their pipeline smarter, and we do so by giving them real-time selling guidance. So connecting with all their different data and then helping them to understand what are specifically the deals that they should prioritize, and then what are the tactical and tangible next best action they can take to close deals faster. Ultimately, hitting their quota and getting to the president's club. So yeah, we're a seed stage startup, so we've raised a little over 3 million US so far, and we've relaunched a new version of Pod a few months back, and now we're kind of hitting the market, working with a few hundreds of different account executive across 100 plus different companies to help them be their best selves, so to speak. So that's the gist of it.
Awesome. So what specific pain points in terms of the sales workflow are you addressing? Because I know you mentioned that, issues with prioritization, not knowing how to push things forward. Why
Yeah.
is that a problem? Is it a training problem? Is it just not having data available to them in the right way? All the
There's
above.
a few different things. The thing with sales is that it's very convoluted, right? At the end of it's very convoluted, but also very straightforward in terms of the golden metric. The thing that matters at the end of the day is, are you closing a deal or not? And I think what we realize is that there's a lot of attention put around productivity in this space, right? So how can I, you know, do some admin work as efficiently as possible? How can I get leads as easily as possible? How do I make sure that I can automate this mundane task or that one? And there's nothing wrong with those, but I think that at the end of the day, you have to, what we truly believe is that it's not because you're getting back 5 to 10 hours every single week from not having to do as much admin work that you're going to spend 5, 10 more hours selling, or you're going to do any more better selling, right? So I think it comes down at the end of the difference between efficiency and effectiveness. And although there's a lot of attention on efficiency as a value proposition, or as a pain point where the companies are solving for account executive, I think that effectiveness is more important. So not increasing the quantity of work being done, but ultimately the quality. And I think it comes down to answer your question, to the root cause of what makes sales difficult, and where a lot of reps are left to themselves ultimately at the end of the day. And it's navigating complex sales situation. No deals is the same. They all have their different personas, own dynamic, different constraints, different concerns, different questions, different companies, different processes, and their work is basically to be able to navigate that. And today, although there exists frameworks and methodologies, there's a big difference between the theory and the practice. And I think what we're realizing is that in the moment, so to speak, when a rep is in front of their computer about to jump on a call, there's very little real-time enablement, very limited real-time guidance. And this is what we're looking to provide reps. It's like giving them that little nudge, that little insight, that little recommendation that'll help them make better, faster, and smarter decisions in how they manage their pipeline. And to be clear, right, we focus on a very specific part of the sales funnel. We don't do prospecting, we don't do forecasting. We're focused on account executives that have, I don't know, 20, 25, 30 deals and are only focused on managing their pipeline, pushing these deals forward. So we're not trying to boil the ocean or solve all the problems for everyone, but this problem of effectiveness is very, very acute for AE specifically as they manage their pipeline.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because so many of the sales solutions that I have seen so far are more related to the BDR function, as
A
in,
lot.
prospecting, automation, customization, etc. I don't do a ton of deep dive on sales AI tools beyond that, but I think that that's really
Yeah.
most of what I've seen. So your solution is interesting that it's for AEs.
There's a lot of, I mean, the AI SDR market is very, very busy and very noisy. And I'm not trying to say whether I'm doing something better or worse than what AI SDRs are. I think they complement each other for every organization. But if you put yourself into the shoes of a chief revenue officer, and think from a money perspective, they're putting a lot of money into generating leads, a lot of money, right? A lead can be, the cost of acquisition of a customer can be $1,000. You put $100 a pop for a lead. And then once those leads are qualified, you basically throw them on the lap of an AE and you expect them to close. When in
Hmm.
reality, it's only the beginning. So I think this is why the best organization understand the necessity of building a pipeline and building funnel, but ultimately understand that you need to put a lot of effort in enabling your team to close that funnel, right? To close those deals and putting as much effort and money into that as well. So this is where we see the biggest white space is at the end of the day, being able to have a percentage improvement in the sales velocity or a percentage improvement in the close rate has a very clear ROI for organization, right? It's a clear economic value at the end of the day because you just have to close one more deal that is worth $100,000 for it to be worth it, so to speak. So it's not about one being better than the other, but ultimately both of them being important to think about your funnel end to end. And I think this is where we come in.
So when we think about the AE's current workflow, because you're right, I think so much of the effort that we talk about, even from a technology and from the sales training, is that BDR to AE pipeline, and then you generally think that like once you're the AE, you've made it, right? Unless you want to go
Yeah.
into leadership. Since we're on the subject of AI SDRs, some of the concerns that I have heard are going to be if we automate out the BDRs and we sort of remove the bottom rung of the career ladder, who then becomes the AEs? Is that something you're thinking about or are approaching in any way?
It's actually a very interesting point. And I'd love to give you a fancy answer, but it's actually the first time thinking about it that way. Like I've been thinking about being able to use BDRs for not necessarily replacing them, but
Hmm.
getting a lot of the mundane research heavy task automated and then get them to either focus on personalization or contribute in other ways. So I never really thought about it in terms of 100% replacement, but ultimately augmentation. Um, but I think you have a very good point though. Typically that's the normal path, and but I still believe that there's a place in the sales funnel for more junior sales rep, whether it's in the what we call today kind of more traditional BDR work, cold
Hmm.
call, cold email, etc., or something else. I think there's still going to be a place because even if you say an AI SDR or a BDR. I think what that has highlighted is the fact that um, people still want a human interaction, right? They
Hmm.
want to talk to someone. Uh, there's so much content out there that many buyer, and when you think about their journey, they're gonna push out the moment at which they're gonna want to talk to someone. But at the end of the day, they want to speak to someone, and that person is mostly going to be a BDR. Are you going to need as many BDRs as before? Probably not, but I'm never a big proponent of replacing, but
Yeah.
rather a kind of augmenting. So that's my take. But I don't know. I don't know if you've seen or heard things differently out there, but would be curious to
Well,
hear
yeah,
what
it
you've
was
seen
it was
in the market.
discussed. There was an episode that we did with it was the guys over at Bounty AI, is the Shar
Mm,
Risky, and then Matt Cooley, and their take was going to be that it's probably going to become more of a junior salesperson who really becomes involved in the full cycle early on, as opposed to just doing the research and pipeline build. But it's
mm.
just an interesting thought experiment. We won't
Yeah,
know until we
it
find out in
happens
reality in a couple of years. Exactly. Yeah.
till it's too
Um,
late.
Right, right. So let's talk a little bit more about the journey of Pod so far. So 100% understand the problem at this point. So when did you come to realize this was a problem? What made you decide to found the company as opposed to doing, the last role that you were in?
Yeah, well, it was actually my previous role. I was at a Series C startup, and we had, to speak, we were underperforming from a revenue perspective, and I had for a long time wanted to start a business, and I jumped into
Mm-hmm.
that problem, and working with the executive team, trying to understand what was the underlying problem with our sales process, or our
Mm-hmm.
ICP, or the enablement, and it kind of exposed me to this whole world of B2B enterprise sales. And to some extent, to me, it was an unknown world because I don't think sales behaves the same as any other function. It's quite unique in the type of people that are there, the incentive structure, the processes, the expectation, the type of skill set is very, very unique. And I kind of fell in love with I said I think the dual nature of the problem I was seeing. It's not just a technology problem, but ultimately also a human and behavioral and change management type of problem. Um, I really love the problem. I spent many months trying to fix it or working on fixing it within the organization. And then when I decided it was time for me to go on to something else, I knew I wanted to build something. So when I was thinking about different ideas, this one kind of was something that I had firsthand experience with and that I had I think, a unique insight to be able to tackle it. But the journey of a founder, so to speak, is one where you're consistently learning. So
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have a solid of a perspective on what was the value proposition or the product as I have right now when I started. When I started, I had an idea, I saw a problem, I thought I had a solution that could solve it. And then ultimately I just spoke to hundreds, if not thousands of people in the sales space, right?
Mm.
AEs, BDRs, RevOps, sales ops, sales enablement, management, consultant, system implementation providers, name it. And that just gave me a very good, helped me to sharpen my pencil in terms of, okay, well, what is the landscape? How are we thinking about something different than what's out there and ultimately better? And ultimately, we're pretty excited about where we are right now in terms of not just the problem that we're facing, and the fact that we think it's a very important problem. It's not just a surface level good to have problem. We think that it can ultimately make a big difference in how sales teams and reps perform, but it's evolved over time. So yeah, but it started back then.
What were some of the learnings from those hundreds of thousands of conversations that you maybe hadn't thought about before or that helped change the evolution of the product?
Gosh, there's many, many, many of those, but I think there's a few of them. I'll pick a few that I think are most shape the our journey. Um, I think one is around what I was mentioning earlier of efficiency versus effectiveness, productivity versus intelligence, so to speak. We initially started with kind of building an application that would be more competitive with the likes of a Scratchpad or a Dooley or a Rattle that are more focused on updating your Salesforce faster, so to speak. And I think what we realized over time, so that was very, very focused on productivity, right? Making
Yep.
your reps more productive. And what we realized over time, and ultimately that insight came from, started with one discussion with a director of RevOps, and it was in middle of 2022, where that person told me, was like, hey, we're cutting expenses across the organization, and I have to cut $500,000 in tools. And the first one I'm going to cut is this kind of productivity tool that we've started
Mm.
and that A's love. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. Why is that the case? Your A's love them.
Hmm.
You told them yourself. And
Right.
what he said then was, I cannot wrap my head around an ROI for that tool. Like it's not because your reps have it doesn't, even if it makes their life easier, I don't see an ROI for us or business as a whole. So we're going to cut that first. And I thought that was very enlightening in the relationship or the perceived value of productivity or, reducing admin work versus the ROI for a sales organization. And that's where we decided to not necessarily pivot, but take a slightly different direction of like, rather than focus on productivity, focus on kind of intelligence insights that would ultimately help to close deals faster and more predictably, so to speak. So that was a big learning around the perceived value of an organization, right? We're a B2B SaaS company. At the end of the day,
Hmm.
we're going to sell to leaders, VPs of sales, head of rev ops, et cetera, et cetera. And if these people don't ultimately see the value or the clear value proposition or the value for their organization, it was going to be tough, right? It was going to be headwinds the whole way. So that was a big one. We always thought about productivity and intelligence as coming hand in hand, and we started with productivity. In hindsight, we probably should have started with these insights first.
Hmm.
That's one. I think another one is in terms of our go-to-market. Since the very beginning, we focus on individual reps as an ideal customer profile, going to them, enabling them, getting them on the platform for free, getting them started, kind of PLG type motion, right? Product-led growth, bottom up.
Yep.
And I think what we realized over time is that this persona, although they have more decision-making power and flexibility to use new tools than other functions, so to speak, they still don't necessarily remain the main decision makers or influencers in a decision. So shifting from a bottom-up motion focused on AEs to a more traditional top-down motion focused on managers, not necessarily leadership, but managers, because they have a clear problem awareness, because they have budget, because they have kind of influence or decision-making power, was another big learning for us. And obviously, we're still an early stage company. We learn every single day, but those were two big aha moment that has shaped our direction, focus, resources, and what we're doing today.
Super interesting. So to dive a little bit deeper onto each of them. So for the first one, when we're talking about ROI or lack thereof when it comes to productivity, how do you think about measuring or explaining ROI of the current product to customers?
Yeah, well, I think the ultimate metric is the same for everyone and it's quite simple and is average quota attainment,
Hmm.
right? It's your close rate, so to speak, or are you hitting your quota? That's the golden metric ultimately of that we're most sales tech tools aim for because that's the one metric that the whole sales or revenue organization um, is aiming for, right? But I think we like to look at kind of leading indicators that lead to quota attainment. So whether that is conversion across the funnel or the overall sales velocity. So rather than typically closing a deal in 4 months, you'll close it in 2.5 months. Those, I think, are indicators of the fact that you are more effectively navigating your deals and you're focusing on deals that will close rather than spreading yourself thin and working on 20 deals at the same time. You kind of focus on you're focusing on high priority or high value deals, value in the grand way, the grand meaning of it, so to speak. And you're also, to us, it's an indicator as well that you are getting guidance and insights to help you navigate these deals that will help you to go from one stage to another quicker. So we like to think about, although it's all linked to the same metric, these lagging indicators of velocity and conversion across the funnel is, I think, how we can prove our ROI to organization to say, hey, well, before that was your conversion rate across deals from stage one to stage two. Now it's 20% better. And I think that ultimately trickles down into more dollars in the pockets of the company.
Got it. And then for the second thing that you had mentioned when we were talking about, who you were selling into and a little bit of that aha moment of switching from the individual AEs to the managers, how have you thought about the types of organizations that you're selling into, whether it's SMB, mid-market enterprise, and then how did you make that decision?
Yeah. Again, in the the hundreds of calls and discussions I've had early on, I got a chance to talk to people that are doing transactional sales, account management, large enterprise deals in all types of industries, from people doing postal services to restaurant services to B2B SaaS. And I think when you under what we end up realizing is that the problem that we're solving, one of not knowing how to navigate your deal, is most relevant to selling motions that are more longer or more complex than others. So think about it as the average sales cycle being at least 3-4 weeks, could
Mm-hmm.
go up to 12 month. Average contract value being slightly, above a certain threshold. So a minimum of $5,000 to $10,000 average contract value. The number of stakeholders involved in your buying committee being at least 3 people, not just one person. So those characteristics ultimately lead to a more complex deal, a more complex, nuanced, ambiguous selling motion. And this is where we typically come in and add most value, right? Help reps to navigate that ambiguity, give them data-driven insights and recommendation to help them navigate it. If you're a company that has a one-call close or a very high velocity or transactional sales cycle, effectiveness isn't that big of a deciding factor in your performance at the end of the day. Your ability to execute fast on a process ultimately impacts your performance, right? So we typically have less value. So yeah, in summary, where we really, really focus is more B2B enterprisey selling motion with large deals, long sales cycle, complex buying committees. But at the end of the day, we're not industry specific, right?
Mm.
Obviously, it's more relevant for some industries than others, but I found it quite interesting to see that whether you're selling a $2.5 million MRI machine or an ERP, right? The selling motion, or at least the approach or the methodology, ends up being pretty much the same, right? It's unique in its own ways and the way that you pitch a product and the value proposition, et cetera, et cetera. But it ends up being a mix of focusing on the right deals, making sure you're talking to the right stakeholders, make sure you're engaging with them and addressing their concerns, and making sure that you ask the right question or cover the right topics according to your methodology. That's what's, more complex sales ends up boiling down to. So the industry, although from a go-to-market perspective, we're targeting some of them, doesn't really have an impact from a product perspective.
So here's an interesting question when it comes to hiring. So I've been doing recruiting for a long time. I've hired a lot of salespeople, mostly in the SaaS
Yeah.
space, and it has almost always been, in my experience, a non-negotiable for the person to have sold SaaS in the past as opposed to sales from some other industry. But in your
Yeah.
experience and all the conversations you're saying that the sales motion is pretty much the same. What's your take on hiring for sales? I mean, even in your own company.
Yeah, good question. Well, I think that although the skill set can be different, what I meant to say is that typically the methodology or the workflows of a seller in its essence don't necessarily vary that much from one industry to another. Then when you look, however, at the skill set of the salesperson, I think there's a big difference whether you're selling into the fintech space or in healthcare versus more traditional B2B enterprise.
Mhm.
I think because of an understanding of the industry, an understanding of their pain points, an understanding of the regulations or constraint, et cetera. I think this is where um, the experience of an account executive is going to come into play and is going to impact their ability to be comfortable in one industry versus another. Knowing the lingo and understanding the specificities of what's happening in one industry versus another. Um, it's interesting that in most cases, I think that if you sell into B2B SaaS,
Mhm.
uh, it might make sense to look for people that have previously sold into B2B SaaS as well, because I think it's a bit different than selling into healthcare. right? But if
Sure.
you're in healthcare or if you're doing insurance, right, I don't think you necessarily want someone that's still B2B SaaS to come in because you need to have some sort of institutional or industry knowledge to be able to talk to insurers or hospitals or government regulators, etc. I think that's my take. I think in our case, yes, looking for someone that has sold SaaS in the past is important because this is what we do, and we want people that understand or have navigated in the past the adoption and the buying journey of people in buying or purchasing SaaS solutions.
Yeah, no, and I agree with you. I was just wondering if you were being contrarian,
Mm.
but that makes sense.
No, 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 yeah, no,
So
completely.
so on that note, just for, since we're talking about hiring, how have you approached internal growth and hiring at Pod? What made you decide to do the fundraise? Was that primarily to support hiring efforts or just for other investments into the
Yeah.
company? Tell me more about that.
It was mostly from a hiring perspective, right? That in the first year and a half of the company, we were very, very lean. It was
Hmm.
myself, a founding engineer, and relied a lot on the contractors, offshore contractors in India and in Asia overall. Um, and I think it was an uphill battle to some extent, right? And when you're a founder, especially a solo founder, you end up having to rely on people, and when you don't have a lot of people to rely on, you put a lot on your own shoulders. So we worked very, very hard to get the first MVP out. We got a bunch of new customers in. We launched the product publicly, got a lot. That was, when was it? It was May 2023. Got a lot of interest and support and inbound users, and that was all great, but we understood that we had put together an MVP, so to speak, or kind of a alpha or a better version of the product. But in order to get to the next level and have a more solid product, and in order to have a higher velocity from a product and go-to-market perspective, I needed more help. That's the gist of it. So like, the first thing that we did after the seed round was hiring. I was in San Francisco before then, decided to move back to Canada, to Montreal, hired the team mostly in Montreal. And rather than relying on contractors, this is where I wanted some solid, trustworthy folks that were gonna come on board and basically be all in on the mission, right? And be passionate about what we're doing and not just treat this as another job. So I think the seed round in the month afterwards, we're really focused on hiring and bringing and putting together a nucleus of a team that was super, super strong and an experience. But the approach to it was one of uh, quite manual, to be honest, right? When
Sure.
it's basically all on myself, reaching out to folks a lot, uh, talking to people, leveraging my network, because I really, really believe that the decision you make from a people perspective this early in the company can really shift the directory, right? You have a negative leader, so to speak, or a negative person that you bring on board in the first 5 to 10 people, then it's just a shaky foundation
Oh, yeah.
for whoever you're going to bring next. And I think it was a famous entrepreneur that said that, but you know, uh, B players don't hire B players, right? They're going to hire B or C players, but only A players can hire A players. So yeah, I really put a lot of effort in bringing like very solid, experienced, knowledgeable folks in, um, kind of in our core group. And right now we're 8, 9 people.
Yep.
And I think that's creates a great foundation from a people perspective, from a culture perspective, from a mindset perspective, and ultimately creates a better environment for us to thrive into. So yeah.
What made you decide to move to Montreal from San Francisco, especially given the hiring for tech talent?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, Canada. I'm originally from Canada, so there's a part of it which is also personal.
Sure.
Um, and we were remote back then and before the seed round, and I had to make a decision on, do I stay in San Francisco and then hire in San Francisco, or do I move back to Montreal and hire in Montreal? And I think there's a few reasons beyond on the personal side why I moved back to Montreal is I think Canada, generally speaking, from a talent pool perspective, is super, super strong.
Hmm.
Montreal and Toronto, from an AI talent pool is amongst the best hubs in the
Really?
world. Yeah, in terms of academic talent. The I'm probably going to get this wrong, but out of the four founding fathers of deep learning, three of them are in Canada, something like that,
Oh, I had no
right? In
idea.
Toronto and Montreal. So it's a hotbed for a lot of kind of technology, software talent. It's also from an economic perspective. Your dollars go further just because of
Hmm.
the foreign exchange and sorry, the exchange rate in terms of the cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. So for me, it was like, hey, I want to go to somewhere from a personal perspective. I want to feel like it's time for me and my partner to go back to Montreal. And it felt just from the fundraise that we had, like you got to put all the chances on your end, and you can get more out of your dollars in Montreal than in San Francisco, where the cost of living, talent is significantly more expensive. So I think that's the
Makes
gist of
sense.
it. There's part of it which is financial, part of it is talent, part of it is personal. Um, but yeah.
I know that this is feels like an eternity in particularly in early stage startup time, but how do you see both the landscape of your market that you're selling into as well as Pod itself evolving over the next, call it 1 to 2 years?
Um, it's interesting because I think it has evolved significantly in the past 1 to 2 years. You could say that sales has probably been one of the busiest segment of the market when it comes to AI solution. There's a lot of noise, like we were saying earlier. There's a lot of widgety tools. Not all of them are going to raise to be a company that is going to last for long, or to be either a venture backable or just a kind of a business that is going to thrive. So it definitely has evolved. I think over the next 1 or 2 years, to me, I think the biggest thing is I think organization are going to get a better handle or a better level of comfort in how they want to integrate AI solution into their stack. And I'm talking purely about on the technology side of things. A lot
Right.
of other things that are shaping up how sales evolves overall, but as it pertains to the role of technology, I think many organizations over the past 1 or 2 years did not know how to implement it. They were more comfortable not making a decision than making a decision, and 3 months down the line, either the solution being obsolete or OpenAI launching a model, etc. And I've talked to many CROs who told me exactly that. Is like, I do not know what to do. There's just too much
Yeah.
noise. So I
Well, I
think
thought
as
about,
kind of yeah,
I was sorry not to cut you off, but I mean, I thought about
yeah,
myself. Like, if I was to build in the AI space, I would be terrified that whatever I'm working on is, OpenAI is going to roll out some new feature and my startup
yeah.
disappears.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is why I think when you're building in the AI space, you have to understand whether if you're working on foundational model, are you
Hmm.
just a few months away from having a bigger player launching something better, or do you have a different positioning? In our case, yes, we're an AI enabled solution. We're not a foundational model builder. So I think the value and our moat and our differentiation is in the application of these models for very, very specific use cases, delivering very clear and tangible, enterprise value for companies. And so that's a bit more defensible. OpenAI, I mean, it's tough to say, but because they're doing a lot of different things, but
Sure.
they're not going to launch an AI solution for account
No.
executive or pipeline management. They're not going to do that. What we do, however, is working with them is to benefit on any advancement that they make in the foundational model building, right? When we started Pod, we were using, not when we started Pod, but a bit after, we're using ChatGPT 3.
Hmm.
And then now we're using, ChatGPT 01. So we're using the latest model, and our use cases are significantly more uh, powerful, nuanced, thoughtful, reliable, precise than they were before. Um, so I think a lot of decision makers in an organization I think, are frightened and are looking for support on how to leverage it. I'm part of an amazing community called Pavilion for kind
Hmm.
of go-to-market executives. And that's a topic that many discuss. Like, hey, well, how have you done this? How are you using AI to do that? And not just from a pure rational or structural perspective, but from a behavioral perspective. How do I make sure that my reps are using it appropriately? How do I make sure that, I'm protecting my data, make sure that it's
Hmm.
not, how do I deal with hallucination? So it's a lot of questions that I think are being ironed out throughout the industry, throughout the kind of the technology segment. And I think over the next 1 or 2 years, it's going to be clearer and clearer to leaders how they should leverage it, and is going to be clearer and clearer for them where the value comes from and how to mitigate the risks of adoption. Like any other technology, right? AI is just a new term, but when you talked about cloud, it was the same exact discussion. So it's an adoption curve like any other technology. So I think that's where we are in the cycle with AI, and this is going to shape the next 2 years of the adoption of it.
Oh, makes sense. And I'm rooting for you guys. I'm very excited to see how the next couple of years pans out for you. And just overall, thank you for coming on the show. It's been great.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. Love talking about this stuff.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Seed to Exit. I hope you found today's conversation insightful and valuable. If you enjoyed the episode, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your network. Your support means the world, helps us continue to grow, and bring more incredible guests onto the show. Now, for more content and updates, follow me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or you can check out MindHire, where we help startups build exceptional teams. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of Seed to Exit.